when I found out that Luis had cheated. Our fight was ugly, the kind of ugly that strips people bare. We hurled the cruelest words at each other and swore we'd never cross paths again. Not even in the next life. But on the day of the divorce, something unexpected happened. A yellowed photo slipped out from our marriage certificate. It was a picture of 17-year-old Luis, the year he skipped all his competitions, just to stay with me in the hospital. After my depression relapsed, he stayed there for half a month, his arms and neck marked with scratches from my episodes. Later, when I was discharged, we took that photo together and promised we would never betray each other. No matter what. We stared at the photo in silence for a long time. Then, a sudden flash of white light filled the room. When we opened our eyes again, we were both back 15 years earlier. And in my mind, a voice echoed, "If you wish to return, you must relive those 15 days all over again." Chapter 1. On the day of the divorce, I put on my prettiest dress and did a careful, precise makeup job. My eyes were swollen and red from crying, but I powdered my face thickly so no one could tell. I clicked along in sky-high heels, chin slightly raised, and walked step by step up to Luis. He looked a little impatient. The cigarette butts at his feet had formed a small hill. When he saw me, he lazily lifted his eyelids, sized me up from head to toe with a cold gaze, and gave a snort. "Amelia, you're not a 17-year-old girl anymore. No matter how much powder you put on, you can't hide those crow's feet at the corners of your eyes." Ever since we tore our relationship to shreds, he's been attacking my age and my temperament, using the most vicious words he can find to curse me again and again. Of course I fought back the same way. Just now I was looking at the hickeys on the side of his neck. So blatant and obvious. So I didn't hold back. I fired back quickly. "You can't even compare. You still want to be a 17-year-old boy every night. And Daniela, so fragile. She just had a miscarriage. And you two are still messing around like this. Aren't you afraid you'll end up causing her to hemorrhage?" Hearing me, the mocking smile vanished from Luis's face and it turned ugly in an instant. Right there at the doors of the Civil Affairs Bureau, he reached out, grabbed my throat, pinned me against the wall, and ground his teeth. "Amelia, how dare you mention that?" If the chill in his eyes could be forged into a sword, I'd be pierced through with 1,000 arrows right then. There was no other reason. In his eyes, the child in Daniela's womb was a life I had killed. I remember when I first learned Daniela was pregnant. The cold went straight through me. She, with a barely rounded belly, knelt in front of me and our colleagues, crying and begging me to give Luis to her. My mind went blank. I screamed at her to get out. She wouldn't leave. She followed me, grabbed at my clothes. I tried to shove her away so she wouldn't touch me. Then she tumbled down the stairs. Crimson blood stained that white dress. That day, the woman Luis had on a pedestal wailed hysterically because of the miscarriage. Luis was like he is now, hands on my throat, cursing me, asking why I hadn't killed myself already. The scene overlapped with that memory, but I didn't crumble into despair and sob like that day. Instead, I lifted my hand and slapped him hard. "If you dare lay a hand on me again, I don't mind dragging this out forever. After all, I'm free and unburdened now. Unlike you, who has the company in a critical moment, and that Daniela you keep on a pedestal. Want me to make a scene at her school and ruin her reputation? Want me to make sure she's disgraced forever?" When a married couple rips their masks off, they know exactly how to stab the other where it hurts most. Chapter 2. I had cried, screamed, and even gone drinking with friends until I passed out. They had witnessed every hardship we'd been through. One of them said she couldn't understand how two people who had once loved each other so deeply could end up like this. I didn't understand either. How did that boy who once swore to give me all the best things in the world turn into a man who couldn't even stand to look at me, who wished I were dead? That day, I thought for a long, long time. I replayed everything. From the moment we first met, I was the pitiful one abandoned by my father and stepmother. And he was the cursed child whose mother had tried to strangle him the day he was born. We were both unwanted, lonely, and insecure. We met by chance on the street and saw the same emptiness in each other's eyes. That's how we became friends. Later, he stayed by my side during my illness, and I shielded him from all the hatred his mother threw at him. On New Year's Eve, when every home was lit up and filled with laughter, We sat on the street, homeless, and gave each other a hug, wishing Happy New Year. From that moment, our fates became entwined. We promised never to part. Between us, it was always mutual salvation. From meeting at 16, to falling in love silently at 17, to marrying at 23 after college. Our love remained stable and happy for 6 long years after marriage. Until that summer, our 7th year together, Luis was set up by a rival company. They spiked his drink, bribed hotel staff, and placed a girl in his room. After that forced, absurd night, Luis knelt before me, slapping himself over and over, saying he deserved to die. I cried until I vomited blood. I said I wanted a divorce, but he clung to me, sobbing, begging me not to leave. We fought for half a month, but eventually, looking back at our past, we reconciled. In that farce, neither of us could point fingers, because both of us were victims. But from then on, a thorn grew in my heart. Our relationship could never return to what it was before. We became more polite, so polite it was terrifying. Then I began to notice something was off about Luis. He started taking frequent business trips, came home with strange perfume on his clothes, and our fights grew more frequent, until I discovered the existence of Daniela, that same girl who had been involved in his setup, one who could be called innocent. 2. Luis felt guilty toward her, so he secretly bought her an apartment. Whenever he and I sat in silence, he turned to her for comfort and conversation. That bright, fiery girl slowly walked into his heart and became the love of his life. Then, when I found out, we began fighting all over again, but his guilt faded with every argument, turning first into impatience, then disgust, and finally into hatred so deep, he wished me dead, especially after Daniela lost her child. Our love was completely exhausted by then, so I wiped away my tears, driven by the last bit of rage in my chest, and smashed everything in our once happy home to pieces. He called me vicious, so I showed him what vicious could look like. I stormed into his company, printed out every one of his misdeeds from over the years, and threw them into the air like confetti. Then I went to Daniela's school, picked a class hour, and scattered the photos all over again. Luis was so furious. He looked ready to strangle me. We cursed each other with the most venomous words, again and again telling each other to go to hell, hysterical and exhausted. I looked at myself in the mirror, disheveled hair, pale face, like a ghost, and suddenly, I felt empty, so I cleaned myself up from head to toe. And on a bright, sunny day, I asked for a divorce. Luis didn't hesitate for a second. He just said, "Fine." My thoughts receded like a tide. Hearing my words, the hatred in Luis's eyes deepened, but the hand around my throat finally loosened. I couldn't help coughing twice. He took several deep breaths, as if trying to calm himself, then straightened his clothes. After a moment, he took out all the documents he had prepared in advance. "Did you bring everything?" he asked. I nodded, pulling the required papers from my bag. On top was our marriage certificate. When we had just gotten married, Luis treated those 2 little red booklets like treasures. He even secretly brought them to work, saying he wanted everyone to see. I had laughed at him for being childish. He held me tightly, looked up at me with eyes full of light, and said, "Amelia, I want everyone to witness our happiness, but happiness has an expiration date. When you still cling to it after the time has passed, it turns into a knife you both use to stab each other in the heart. Just like us, so absurdly pathetic." As I steadied myself and prepared to step into the Civil Affairs Bureau, a gust of wind blew. The marriage certificate slipped from my hand and fell to the ground. When I bent down to pick it up, a yellowed photograph fluttered out. It was a picture of Luis and me, taken when we were 17. Back then, Luis had skipped several major competitions. After hearing that my depression had relapsed and I'd tried to take my own life, he stayed with me in the hospital for half a month. At that time, I was unstable, not only wanting to die, but wanting to hurt others too. I was like a madwoman, hysterical every day. Luis stayed with me the whole time, his arms and face covered with scratches from my outbursts. I still remember one night, When I woke up suddenly, to see him resting his head on his hand, smiling at me, I reached out and touched the marks on his face. He sighed and said, "This face of mine, you have to be gentler with it. Not because it hurts. I'm just afraid you'll think I'm ugly later and stop loving me." Then he added, half joking, half tender, "If it gets too hard, bite me, cut me if you must. Just don't hurt yourself, okay?" We took that photo together in the hospital, and swore never to betray each other, or be struck by lightning if we did. My heart suddenly tightened, as if pierced by something sharp. Back then, Luis's entire world had been filled with me, his love burning bright and unrestrained. But now, I turned to look at him. He was staring down at the photo on the ground. That once cold, sharp expression of his softened slightly in the wind. He lifted his head, and our eyes met. In each other's gaze, we saw the same memories, and the same ruin. We stayed silent for a long, long time, until another gust of wind swept past. The dust stung my eyes. I reached up to rub them, and suddenly, a burst of white light flashed before me. Chapter 3. Inside the hospital room. Amelia sat on the bed, playing absent-mindedly with Luis's fingers. Luis rested his chin on one hand, staring straight at her. Amelia, blushing under his gaze, mumbled softly, "Why are you looking at me like that?" Hearing this, Luis reached out and gently pulled her into his arms. His eyes filled with tenderness. He said, "My Amelia is the best thing to look at. I could look at you forever and never get enough." Listening to his words, Amelia pushed him away slightly, rubbed her own face, and asked seriously, "Then what if one day I grow old, with crow's feet all around my eyes and not a trace of beauty left? Will you stop liking me?" At that, Luis immediately put away his smile, and spoke with sincerity. "Amelia, I never loved you for your looks, even if you're 70 or 80. Your hair all white, your teeth all gone. You'll still be the most adorable old lady in my eyes. No young girl could ever compare." Through the glass of the hospital door, Luis and I stood watching them. They were the 17-year-old versions of us. We had returned 15 years into the past, watching the two people we once were reenact the love that had once defined our lives. Inside, the younger Luis and Amelia were still whispering to each other. Lost in soft, endless affection, I looked at the 17-year-old Luis, at the way he slowly reached out and traced Amelia's eyebrows and eyes with his fingers. He told her, "Even if you have crow's feet one day, they'll be the cutest crow's feet in the world. My Amelia is the most adorable girl under heaven." The memory and the present overlapped perfectly, but seeing it again, seeing it with my own eyes, was far more suffocating than any memory could be. If that 17-year-old Luis knew that the 32-year-old version of himself would one day curse me with cruel words, mocking the same crow's feet he once loved, what would he think? The Luis standing beside me now was also watching the scene quietly. The young boy and girl in that room were all love and innocence, neither of them knowing how hysterical, how destructive their future selves would become. Luis looked away, his eyes downcast, lost in thought. Then he lifted his gaze to me, his eyes falling on the corners of mine, and for the first time, they held unmistakable guilt and regret. I parted my lips to say something, but before I could speak, a voice echoed inside my mind. Luis stiffened beside me. He had clearly heard it too. The voice said, "If you wish to return to your time, you must relive these 15 days. I asked, "Why?" There was a long silence. Then the same mechanical tone repeated, "If you want to go back, this is the only way." The lights in the hospital corridor flickered, once, twice, and when I could see clearly again, Luis was gone. He had vanished completely. Chapter 4. I looked up at the two people in the hospital room, and the scene changed again. The clock on the wall showed 2 o'clock in the morning. Amelia opened her eyes and looked at Luis, who was lying by the bedside. There were several scratches on his cheeks, and on his arms. Long marks stretched down from his shoulders, frightening to look at. Amelia looked at those wounds and couldn't help but cry. She quietly lifted the blanket, got out of bed, took an ointment from the drawer, and carefully applied it to Luis's wounds. As for this memory, I have never forgotten it. At that time, because of a depressive episode, I had tried to take my own life several times. Even when my emotions were extremely unstable, I wanted to hurt others. Luis stayed with me, letting me scratch him until his skin and flesh were torn. Yet he still smiled at me. He even said, "Amelia, it doesn't hurt at all." And that night was one of my rare moments of clarity. Looking at his wounds, my heart ached terribly, so I quietly applied medicine to him. But I remember very clearly that on that night, he was too tired and never woke up. So the Luis who woke up now was the 32-year-old Luis. He slowly opened his eyes, looked dazed for a moment, then quickly turned to glance at the hospital door. There was a pane of glass on the door, and our eyes met through it. He looked at me and opened his mouth. Just as he seemed about to say something, the Amelia in front of him reached out and hugged him. Amelia seemed unable to see me and felt nothing unusual. She held Luis tightly, sniffled, and said in a tearful voice, "Sorry." I lost control again. She was crying so hard, and Luis, facing that sudden embrace, stiffened completely. He pressed his lips together, slowly raised his hand, and gently patted Amelia's back. "It's okay. It's okay." Amelia released him, her eyes still wet with tears. Yet she tried hard to smile. Then, "Can I put some medicine on you?" Luis nodded silently. From time to time, he looked at Amelia, and every time their eyes met, she gave him a bright, radiant smile, and in that smile was love that could never be hidden. "Luis," Amelia suddenly said, her eyes full of dreams for the future. "When we get married, do you think we'll be the happiest couple in the world?" Luis looked at her hopeful eyes, as if touched by something painful, and nodded quietly. "Yes, we'll definitely be the happiest couple." He didn't even dare to look up at Amelia, even from behind. I could see his guilt. "Then if we stay together for many, many years, and one day you suddenly get tired of me and fall in love with another girl, I'll probably lose control and fight with you. At that time, will you still love me like you do now?" 17-year-old Amelia was sensitive and fragile. All her hopes and fears for the future rested on 17-year-old Luis. Similarly, 17-year-old Luis placed all his life's hope on Amelia. If he were still that same person, he would have said, "There will never be such a day, because I love you, and I will only ever love you." But he wasn't him anymore, so he lowered his head, filled with guilt. As the girl's gaze burned too hot, he seemed to be burned by it, his body trembling slightly. Amelia was too sensitive. Even that tiny difference made her feel something was wrong, so she wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes, gently cupped Luis's face, and said softly but firmly, "Luis, there will never be such a day, because you love me, and I love you. And this love will last a lifetime. I believe in you, and you must believe in me, okay?" The girl's eyes were too bright. Luis's expression grew more and more complicated. Perhaps too many memories surged in his heart. In the end, his eyes reddened, and he nodded heavily. There will never be such a day." Hey. As soon as his words fell, I couldn't help but laugh softly. His back stiffened slightly. He must have heard my laugh. But he didn't turn around. He just lowered his head, lost in thought. I looked at the Amelia in the hospital room and wanted so badly to say, "Silly girl, love is the funniest thing. You won't become the happiest couple in the world. You'll both lose control, curse each other with the cruelest words, and endlessly repeat your regrets." My heart felt heavy. I couldn't help but close my eyes. But when I opened them again, the scene had changed. I was wearing a hospital gown, standing in the small garden behind the hospital, and 17-year-old Luis was running toward me, holding a bouquet of my favorite baby's breath. Chapter 5. "Amelia, why did you come downstairs alone?" Luis ran up to me, his eyes filled with concern as he looked me over from head to toe. Seeing that I looked calm and had no visible injuries, he finally let out a sigh of relief. Then he quickly helped me sit on a nearby bench. "If you think the ward is too stuffy, just tell me. I'll come downstairs with you for a walk, okay?" Luis's tone was very gentle. He reached out to brush away the loose strands of hair covering my forehead, then tilted his head and gave me a playful smile. I looked at him, the 17-year-old Luis before me. His eyes were clear and full of warmth. In his gaze, there was no one else but me. Humans are always easily moved by the beauty of youth. If the Luis standing before me were the same man who later almost strangled me because of Daniela, then no matter how gentle his eyes were at this moment, I wouldn't feel the slightest stir in my heart. But unfortunately, he was the 17-year-old Luis. I just stared at him quietly. Perhaps my gaze carried sadness I couldn't hide, because Luis keenly sensed my low mood. He placed the bouquet of baby's breath in my arms and, like coaxing a child, gently patted my head. I know it's stuffy in the hospital, and you don't like the smell of disinfectant. I asked the doctor, just a few more days, and we'll be discharged. When that time comes, wherever you want to go, I'll go with you, okay? Feeling his hand on my head, my heart ached as if bitten by countless ants. I couldn't bring myself to speak harshly to the 17-year-old Luis, yet the pain of the coming years returned the moment I closed my eyes. So I stood up as if escaping, stepping backward in haste. The cobblestone path wasn't flat, and distracted as I was, I twisted my ankle. It wasn't serious, just a little painful. Luis quickly supported me, his face filled with worry. Does it hurt a lot? This pain, compared to the suffocating agony of being choked by the neck, was far, far easier to bear. So I shook my head and told him, it doesn't hurt. But Luis pressed his lips tightly, his eyes reddening slightly, his voice muffled. Amelia, we agreed, if you're unhappy, you must tell me right away. If you're in pain, you have to tell me too. How can a twisted ankle not hurt? Silly Amelia, he muttered under his breath, sounding almost aggrieved. Then he took hold of my foot, slipped off my shoe and half my sock, gently held my ankle, and began to massage it softly. Amelia, can you tell me why you're sad? The 17-year-old Luis seemed to have endless patience. Even when I stayed silent, he could calmly comfort me again and again. I lowered my gaze to look at him. He, too, kept his head down, focused on what he was doing. That was better, because I didn't really want to see his eyes. Those eyes, so pure and passionate, if they were destined to fade one day, then perhaps it was better not to see them at all. I lifted my head and looked up at the blue sky and white clouds. Then I couldn't help but speak. Luis, do you think one day we'll grow tired of each other? At the sound of my words, the pressure on my ankle suddenly increased. Luis looked up, staring at me intently, trying to read something from my expression. I met his gaze and smiled. Think about it, life is so long. Along the way, we'll meet all kinds of people. Maybe one day, you'll find another girl younger and prettier than me. Think I'm crazy, and stop loving me. I won't. Luis answered decisively. He bent slightly at the waist, trying to meet my eyes. He stared straight at me with complete determination. He said, I like you. I've long been ready for a lifetime with you. Words of love always sound so sweet. If I were the 17-year-old Amelia, I would have cried and held on to that moment of happiness. But I had lived through the wreckage of the years that followed. I mean, if one day you really did fall for another girl, and even had a child with her, and you started to hate me, cursing that you wished I would die. Luis, what if that day really comes? He must have heard the seriousness in my voice, because he gripped my hand, his tone serious and solemn. As he did, his sleeve rode up a little. A scar on his arm was revealed. That was from last New Year's Eve, when my stepmother schemed and brought home a nephew from her family who had intellectual disabilities, saying they wanted to match us together. I refused, and she went to my father to complain. That day I was beaten terribly. Luis had come to wish me a happy new year and, hearing my cries, rushed in. My father was furious and said he would whip his unloving daughter to death. Luis threw himself in front of him. His back was covered in whip marks, and his arms bore many scars. Seeing me fall silent, he said, if some future Luis treats you that badly, beat him up good, no matter how he regrets it later, no matter how he tries to guilt you with memories of the past. Do not forgive him, he's not worth it. Understand? Luis said it so earnestly that tears fell from his eyes. I reached out and wiped the tears from his cheeks. Then I forced a smile. But I can't beat him up, what then? Luis was silent for a moment. His voice grew hoarse. He asked, Would he lay hands on you? I nodded. Yes, he would grab my throat and tell me to go die. The moment the words left my mouth, Luis lunged and hugged me hard. He was silent for a very long time, long enough that I could feel dampness on his shoulder. I didn't move. I let him hold me. After an unknown while, Luis finally said, "Then he's truly a beast. He should go to hell." A gust of wind blew sand into my eyes and stung. I lifted my gaze forward. The 32-year-old Luis was standing not far away, his emotions churning in his eyes. Chapter 6. Over the next few days, the scenes kept changing. Sometimes I was part of them, and in the blink of an eye, Luis would appear in front of Amelia. That Luis, the one who would later become hysterical toward me. In front of Amelia, his disguise was flawless. He smiled at her gently, held her tightly when she was in pain, and even when she bit his arm until it bled, he would still say, "Amelia, it doesn't hurt." I just watched them quietly. But in moments like these, Luis never dared to look back at me, not even once. Maybe he also felt too ashamed to. As for me, sometimes I would also meet the 17-year-old Luis. Every time he looked at me, his eyes were filled with burning love. We would sit together on the hospital lawn, counting the scattered stars in the sky. He would also use the prize money he had saved up from competitions to buy me lots of gifts, just to make me happy, even if it meant eating the cheapest buns and free soup in the cafeteria for a long time afterward. He was content. The 17-year-old Luis was truly, truly good. And those days felt like stolen time. That's why they passed so quickly. Half a month went by in the blink of an eye. The scenes kept shifting, until Luis and I finally entered the same memory together for the first time. It was when my condition was almost healed. Luis and I were taking a walk downstairs. It was the same setting, yet we could no longer do the same things we once did. We walked in silence, retracing the path of the past according to memory. Perhaps the silence became too heavy, for he finally couldn't hold it in and spoke first. "Amelia, I'm sorry." Hearing that sudden apology, I froze. Standing still, I looked up at him and said, "You don't have to say those hypocritical words just because the 17-year-old Amelia loves you again." Because I was no longer 17. Luis shook his head. The man who had glared at me just days ago now seemed much softer. His gaze was complicated, torn, guilty. I understood exactly what he was feeling, compared to a memory preserved in nostalgia. This kind of first-hand experience hit much deeper. He saw how purely and passionately his 17-year-old self once loved me, and remembering those old vows, the oaths of never betraying, the promises of never changing, realizing how he had forgotten them. All of that now struck him like a dull invisible blade, slowly driving into his heart, hurting unbearably, yet impossible to pull out. "Amelia, I don't even know why we ended up like this." He closed his eyes. Over the years, we'd been through too much. We had seen the cruelty of people's hearts, and learned our lessons through pain, lessons that stripped away all our innocence and simplicity. So now, he couldn't cry like the 17-year-old Luis. He only looked at me with complex eyes, wanting to speak but not daring to. So I told him, "Because people's hearts change, because you can't find that pure heart again. There are too many temptations in this world. You can't be as steadfast as you were at 17. I paused, meeting his gaze directly. "Luis, admit it. The person you are now is a truly awful, awful man." At my words, Luis's eyes suddenly tightened. He tried to grab my arm, but I stepped back first. We were so caught up in speaking our hatred that didn't belong to this time, that we forgot something very important was about to happen between the Luis and Amelia of this era. The next moment, a disheveled woman rushed toward us, knife in hand. If we were still ourselves, if memory and reality could fully overlap, I would have reacted first, pushing Luis out of the way without hesitation. Then the woman's knife would have slid down my neck, leaving a scar across my back that would never fade. The blue hospital gown on me would have been soaked in blood. Luis would have held me tightly, eyes full of terror and despair, crying hysterically until he lost control. But the man standing before me now was no longer that boy whose world revolved around me. So I simply stood still. I watched as he flinched at the sound, his eyes tightening sharply, and stumbled to dodge aside. But he was still a step too late. That knife, perhaps it could only be appeased once it had tasted blood. The long, deep slash this time landed on Luis's back. I felt the hot spray of blood on my face and heard the woman's hysterical scream. She shouted, "Luis, why don't you just die already?" Chapter 7. Even though we were reliving the scene, the wounds Luis received this time were real. The moment the knife cut through his skin, the chilling cold of it, but he didn't feel fear. The first thing that came to his mind was Amelia. Luis would probably never forget that summer when his deranged mother escaped from the mental hospital, running toward him with a small knife, wanting to kill him. Everyone was terrified and tried to run away. Only Amelia threw herself in front of him without hesitation, taking the knife for him without a single complaint. At that time, the girl he loved was bleeding in his arms, and his heart ached so much he could barely breathe. But even in that pain, Amelia sensed his fear and managed to squeeze out a faint smile. She told him, "Luis, it doesn't hurt at all." But normally, she would cry even if she tripped and scraped her knee. With such a long wound on her back, how could it not hurt? Luis suddenly felt his chest tighten, as if something were twisting inside, making it hard for him to breathe. He wanted desperately to grab onto something, anything, but the Amelia who had once shielded him from that knife now had no sorrow or joy on her face. Luis's heart grew even heavier, because he couldn't forget that during one of their hysterical fights, he had cruelly told her that the scar on her back was ugly. He had deliberately ignored the flicker of pain in her eyes then. Now, seeing the memory replay before him, he felt as if his heart were dying. Luis couldn't hold back his tears of regret. He said, "Amelia, so it really hurt back then, didn't it?" Hearing that, Amelia couldn't help but laugh. A sharp, ironic laugh. She said, "But the truth proves it wasn't worth it." That one simple sentence completely shattered Luis. The same Luis who had fought countless battles in the business world. In a daze, another memory surfaced. Outside the operating room, he had been kneeling in the hallway, crying uncontrollably, vowing in his heart that he would never, ever fail Amelia. But how had the 32-year-old him forgotten that vow? Chapter 8. This time, the scene lasted a long while. Luis was taken into the emergency room. His mother was restrained and once again sent to the psychiatric hospital next door. The deep love of youth, once unwavering, was eventually betrayed and destroyed as time and experience accumulated. That man betrayed her and failed her. For someone like her, whose world revolved around love, the pain was unbearable. So when it came to the child in her womb, she ignored everyone's advice and chose to give birth, not out of love, but out of hate. She hated that man, and she hated this child. From childhood to adulthood, it was endless torment. It was as if they were not mother and son, but the bitterest enemies in the world. Hatred consumed her, driving her into madness. For Luis, his only family, he loved her deeply yet didn't dare approach her. He had never once called her mom, because she wouldn't allow it. He had once held me while crying, asking, "Should I have never been born?" I hugged him back and sang him the lullaby my mother used to sing to me when I was little, trying to soothe his pain. And now, the wheel of fate had turned once again. Sometimes I even wondered, was this some kind of inherited curse in our blood? This same cruelty? I couldn't figure it out. Nor did I want to see Luis, so I just lay on the bed and fell asleep. When I woke up, the scene had changed again. This time, Luis and I were spectators. In the hospital room, it was still the image of me being gravely injured after taking the knife for him. We stood at the doorway. Luis's face was pale, and every sense in this memory felt heightened. The pain of that stab was 10 times stronger than what I had felt back then. He looked at me, emotions surging in his eyes, as if wanting to say something. I just looked at him quietly. Then he lowered his gaze, and a tear, unguarded and raw, fell onto the back of my hand. "I'm sorry, Amelia." I looked at that tear and suddenly found it unbearably ironic. When we were young, we were just like his mother, valuing love above everything else. We were so sure we would never repeat the mistakes of the previous generation. And yet, we ended up screaming at each other, spitting the cruelest words, forgetting all our past love, wishing each other dead. From love arises sorrow. From love arises fear. He who is free from love has no sorrow and no fear. At that moment, the Luis and Amelia inside the hospital room faced the camera and took that photograph. The next instant, the world before us collapsed. Chapter 9. It felt like waking up from a dream. When I opened my eyes, it was as if nothing had changed at all. We were still standing in front of the Civil Affairs Bureau. The only difference was that the yellowed photograph that had fallen to the ground had vanished. There had been 2 copies of that photo. The one that belonged to me could never be found again. I withdrew my gaze. This time, I didn't bare all my claws and fangs to protect myself from being hurt. I simply looked at him calmly and said, "Luis, we should go get divorced." Luis slowly lifted his head. The coldness in his eyes had completely disappeared. His emotions were surging, complex and hard to describe. He pressed his lips together, as if he wanted to say something. But when the words reached his mouth, he fell silent again. Yet silence never lasts forever. The phone in his hand lit up, and the ringtone assigned exclusively to Daniela cut through the stillness. It must have been a reminder, or perhaps a provocation aimed at me. But surprisingly, Luis didn't answer. It was as if he hadn't heard it at all. His eyes stayed locked on me, full of hesitation and unsaid words. So I had no choice but to repeat myself patiently. "Luis, we should go get divorced." The moment my words fell, Luis's body trembled violently. He stumbled backward in panic, and the documents in his hands scattered across the ground. "Amelia, I was wrong." He slowly crouched down, wrapping his arms tightly around himself. I lowered my eyes to look at him, and saw, to my shock, a scar on his back identical to mine. I reached up to touch my own scar, and miraculously, the mark that should have been carved into my skin was gone. So, the words we spoke and the actions we took in those memories could actually affect reality. If I had known that earlier, I would have told the 17-year-old Amelia not to give her whole heart to Luis. But I know that would have been useless, because the 17-year-old Amelia loved Luis so deeply. She was a stubborn girl, one who would never turn back until she hit a wall. So, today's ending was inevitable. I reached out and patted Luis on the head. "I don't accept your apology, and I have no intention of being entangled with you any longer. If your conscience has finally awakened, and you truly feel sorry for what you've done all this time, then hurry up and divorce me. Separation is the best ending between us." But when he heard that, Luis suddenly stood up. He looked at me and shook his head. "No, Amelia, you loved me so much. How could you really bear to divorce me?" I laughed. It was a laugh full of naked mockery and irony. I told him, "Because the person you are now isn't worth loving, not even a little bit." Chapter 10. Luis ran away. It could be said that he fled in panic. The documents were scattered all over the ground, and I picked them up one by one. A newlywed couple who had just received their marriage certificate walked by. The woman said, "Your husband looks really regretful. Maybe you could give him another chance?" I looked at her, her face radiant with happiness. I knew she meant well, not wanting me to get divorced over something she thought was trivial. So I told her. His first affair was an accident, and I forgave him. But that didn't bring guilt, it only made him worse. He kept a mistress, got her pregnant, and even grabbed me by the throat and asked why I hadn't just died. A man like that, I deeply regret ever giving him a second chance. You should never give him another." Hearing my words, the woman froze for a moment. Then guilt filled her face. "I'm sorry. I didn't know that's why." I gave her a casual smile, then turned and walked away. Luis was nowhere to be found. He didn't answer his phone, didn't reply to messages, as if he had vanished from the world. When Daniela came to see me, I was sitting with a friend, discussing my future plans. She barged in with red eyes, screaming hysterically at me. "Do you have no shame? Luis doesn't even like you anymore. His heart and soul belong to me now. He said he wants to be with me forever. Do you hear me? Forever. Why won't you divorce him? Why do you keep clinging on? We're the ones who truly love each other. Why do you have to interfere?" listening to her accusations. I only found it absurd. Forever? Heh. I took a deep breath and opened my Livestream app. I used to post short videos online. At first, it was just to pass the time. But later my account gained followers. And my live streams often attracted a big audience. I turned the camera toward Daniela. She thought I was recording a video. And sneered disdainfully. Don't think that filming this will somehow make Luis see me as the bad woman. He already told me, he loves all of me, the good and the bad. He said my hysterical, passionate self is 1,000 times more interesting than your lifeless self. As she spoke, I glanced at the Livestream page. The viewer count was rising at a terrifying rate. Perhaps people are born to love gossip. Because the number kept climbing rapidly. So this is your reason for being a mistress? I asked calmly. The words seemed to pierce her. Daniela glared at me furiously. So what if I am the mistress? Haven't you heard? It's the unloved one who's really the third wheel. Amelia, you're already in your 30s. And I haven't even graduated from college. I'm young, beautiful, passionate, and fun. How could you possibly compare to me? If you had even a shred of dignity, you'd leave on your own instead of ruining our relationship. They say not everyone can be a mistress. And at that moment, I truly understood why. To be that shameless, you need a heart made of steel. So I grabbed Daniela by the hair. She screamed sharply. And I dragged her toward me. Then flipped the camera so she could see the Livestream screen. I watched her expression shift. From smug arrogance to sheer terror. If being a mistress makes you so proud, then you shouldn't mind greeting everyone watching, right? The next second, Daniela let out a shrill scream right by my ear. Amelia, you'll die a horrible death. She tried to knock the phone from my hand. My friend rushed over to restrain her. And the three of us ended up entangled in a chaotic struggle. Stop it! A furious voice came from the doorway. And our movements froze. Daniela, looking pitiful and tear-streaked, immediately threw herself into Luis's arms. Luis, where have you been these past few days? Do you know what Amelia has done to me while you were gone? She almost bullied me to death. Her voice trembled with tears. Her face a portrait of victimized innocence. I said nothing, just took out the documents Luis had dropped earlier. Since you're here, let's finish what we started. Luis gently pushed Daniela away and walked toward me step by step. From his pocket, he took out a yellowed photograph. His tone carried a mix of nostalgia and sorrow. He said, "This photo, my copy of it, I kept it in a metal box, hidden in a shop in the city we first traveled to together. Back then, I thought that one day, when we returned to that place, I'd take it out, and we'd reminisce about the past together. It would have been such a beautiful memory. So, these past few days, you disappeared to find this photo?" He nodded, a bitter smile tugging at his lips. Amelia, I was a fool. I loved you so much that I wanted to give you the best of everything in the world. If not for that accident, our love never would have changed. I only felt dirty. I was afraid to touch you, afraid to see the sadness in your eyes. So I ran away. Daniela's smile reminded me of you when you were young. And I kept chasing that memory. Step by step, I lost myself. I forgot who the person was that I should have spent my life with. But now I understand. The vow I made in that hospital hallway back then, it came from the bottom of my heart. And now, I want to fulfill it. Amelia, will you give me another chance? As he spoke, I reached out and took the photo. In it, we were both smiling brightly, our eyes full of hope for a beautiful future. Pure and fiery. I didn't know why. But the photo suddenly felt hot in my hands. I turned it over. A line of black text slowly appeared. If you cannot love her for a lifetime, then let her go before you hurt her again, and then you should die, for you've broken your promise, and become the same scum your father was. Luis. Age 17, ***. Chapter 11. Because of that line of words, Luis finally gave in and agreed to divorce me. According to our previous agreement, the property would be split equally, but this time, Luis changed the terms of the agreement. He said he wanted to leave all his assets to me. I didn't refuse. We finalized the divorce quickly, and all the property was transferred under my name. I immediately sold the house here, then left for a place where the spring was warm and flowers were in bloom. Planning to settle down there, to start a new life. Luis changed his phone number again and again, sending me countless messages, recalling every little memory from the past. It seemed he was trapped in that dream, believing himself still the 17-year-old boy he once was. I never replied, blocked him again and again, until finally I changed my own number. From then on, my world was completely quiet, but we had too many mutual friends. So from time to time, I would still hear news about him. Luis had given me everything he owned. He was left with nothing. Daniela fought with him, crying and begging him to take the money back. Luis directly said he wanted to break up. Daniela refused, screaming and making a scene, but that live stream of mine had drawn too many viewers. A mistress who had tried to destroy someone else's marriage, and the tragic story of the young love between Luis and me, that people had somehow learned. Cause and effect. Too sorrowful to watch. A massive wave of online abuse erupted like a volcano. Daniela was forced to withdraw from school, recognized easily wherever she went. Many people who had suffered similar pain to mine hated mistresses with all their hearts. She had nowhere to hide. Driven to the brink of collapse, even her parents publicly denounced their shameless daughter and announced that they were cutting ties with her completely. She lost her family. Luis, too, made up his mind to sever all ties with her. She could no longer walk beneath the sunlight. As for Luis, things weren't any better for him. All his personal information was exposed as well, along with that of his father, who had also been unfaithful. Endless waves of righteous condemnation. A flood of curses that never stopped. Luis lost his job, became aimless and disoriented. Then his mother once again escaped from the psychiatric hospital, still holding that same small knife. She stabbed him viciously when he least expected it. She said, "See, you're just like your father. You belong in hell." But he didn't die. He didn't go to hell. Yet his body suffered severe damage. Tormented by constant pain day after day, he grew so thin he was barely recognizable. Perhaps, before long, he would die in agony. A friend once asked me, knowing about his miserable state, if I wanted to see him one last time. It might have been the final chance to do so. I refused. Chapter 12. As the seed is sown, so shall the fruit be reaped. All things are created by the mind.